They sent a distress call, not because they thought someone would come, but because they had to try. Out on the forgotten edge of space, a small human colony was under siege. No backup, no allies, no help. The Council had already turned its back. The galaxy had already moved on. And Earth? Earth had been silent for decades. They said Earth had gone dark. They said Earth didn't fight anymore. They said Earth wouldn't care. But they were wrong. Because when the sky was burning, when hope had vanished, when the last defender whispered, "We're not going to make it," something answered. It didn't come with promises. It didn't come with words. It came with ships, with silence, with force. And when Earth's armada arrived, everything changed. They sent out a distress call, not because they believed anyone would come, but because it was the only thing left to do. Out at the edge of civilized space, beyond the trade routes and council-regulated sectors, sat a little world most people had already forgotten. Varel Prime, a backwater colony. Population, barely a few 100,000. No military presence, no major exports. Just a stubborn group of settlers who refused to give up on the idea that the frontier still meant something. And now they were under siege. It started with static, a few long-range sensors picking up irregular shadows in the void. Then came the interference. Communications dropped. Orbital satellites blinked out one by one. And then, in the darkness above the atmosphere, they arrived. The Qatari warband, a fleet of pirates, slavers, and raiders operating outside council, law, ruthless, efficient, known for leaving nothing behind. No warnings, no negotiations, just silence and fire. Varel's defenses were laughable. A handful of outdated plasma cannons, a shield grid meant for meteor storms, and an emergency militia made of miners, teachers, and retired security officers. When the Qatari ships descended through the clouds, the people knew it was over. There would be no council response. They were too far out, too unimportant. The bureaucrats would take months just to process a distress beacon, and so, a single message was broadcast into the stars. This is Varel Prime. We are under attack. Civilians, children, families, we request aid. Anyone, please. And then they waited. Not for help, but for the end. The Qatari began their bombardment. Not to destroy, but to weaken. To break the will of the people before they descended with blades and plasma rifles. Their lead ship hovered like a predator, in the sky, broadcasting a single sentence across the planet's emergency frequency. Your screams will be your anthem. And still, no one came. In an underground bunker, deep beneath what was once the colony's central archive, an old man listened to the broadcasts in silence. His name was Rendon Hale. Retired. Forgotten. Once a fleet admiral of Earth's outer defense network. He had come to Varel to die in peace. To leave the horrors of war behind. But as he heard the Qatari laughing over open channels, as he watched children cry and people cling to each other for comfort they couldn't guarantee, he felt something he hadn't in years, heat in his blood, steel in his spine. He walked to a locked crate in the corner of the bunker. Inside, an old comms unit, ancient by today's standards, but still functional. He plugged it in, connected the battery, tuned the frequency, and then, without emotion, without ceremony, he spoke. Earth Command, this is Admiral Rendon Hale. Confirm identity code Alpha 7 Zeta 4. A pause. Then, identity confirmed. Proceed. He leaned into the mic, slow and steady. Varel Prime is under siege. Qatari, fleet present, civilian threat imminent. I am requesting emergency deployment of Sol-class fleet assets. Full authority, Earth-level priority. There was silence on the line, long enough that he thought maybe Earth really had gone silent. Then, at last, a reply. A voice he didn't recognize, young, cold, efficient, acknowledged. Armada en route, and nothing more, no questions, no requests for clarification, no debate, just action. Above the burning skies of Varel Prime, no one knew that anything had changed. The Qatari continued their slow, methodical torment of the colony, and the people of Varel huddled deeper into their shelters, praying not for salvation but for a quick death, because no one thought help would come, not from the Council, not from nearby systems, certainly not from Earth. Earth hadn't sent warships in decades. They hadn't responded to Council meetings. They hadn't joined in border skirmishes. They had, for all intents and purposes, withdrawn. And everyone assumed they liked it that way. But Randon Hale knew better. He'd seen what Earth was capable of when it was quiet. He'd seen the armadas buried in the shadows. He'd walked the halls of silent stations no other race knew existed. So as the people around him wept, he sat still and whispered to no one in particular, "They'll come, and when they do, the stars will burn." The days dragged on. Varel Prime didn't fall in a single strike. The Qatari weren't interested in quick victory. That would have been too merciful. Instead, they picked the world apart, slowly. They circled the skies, watching, bombarding, at random intervals. Never enough to wipe everything out, just enough to keep the people terrified. It was a message, a lesson. No one's coming for you. The colony's communications hub was gone. The planetary shield grid, already outdated, was barely holding, flickering with every blast. Civilians had been moved into underground shelters, but supplies were running low. The air was stale. The generators were failing. The militia, brave as they were, had nothing but hand weapons and scattered combat drones that short-circuited after a few minutes of operation. They were teachers, farmers, mechanics, people who had once believed in building something out here on the edge, and now they were huddled in the dark, trying not to cry in front of their children. On the surface, above the bunkers, the Qatari stalked like wolves. Their landing parties weren't large, but they were brutal. They torched crop fields, destroyed solar towers, looted medical depots. Anyone they found above ground was executed without ceremony. The defenders tried to fight back twice. Both times ended the same way. Blood in the sand. Screams over the comms. A static hiss that signaled another patrol wiped out. From the high cliffs above the colony, the Qatari commander, Verzek the Unbroken, watched with a kind of amused detachment. He didn't fear retribution. The Council had made it clear Varel Prime was outside their jurisdiction. A quiet little note had gone out weeks ago. Let it go. Not worth the political cost. Earth? He laughed at the thought. Earth was a myth. A sleeping dog content in its kennel. They hadn't lifted a finger in decades. If Earth ever had teeth, they were long gone now. Inside the bunkers, Randon Hale moved like a ghost. He said little, but the people followed him. He organized rotations, distributed the last of the supplies, kept the generators humming with patchwork repairs no one else could manage, and still every night he returned to the old comms unit. He didn't speak into it. He didn't need to. The channel was already open. He was just waiting, listening, because he knew they were coming. On the 5th day of the siege, something changed. Not above the colony, not on the surface, but in space. Far beyond the planet's orbit, a Qatari scout ship detected a minor gravitational disturbance. Just a flicker, a blip, barely enough to register. The techs on board marked it and moved on. But an hour later, a second disturbance, larger than a third, then 7 more. They recalibrated the scanners, ran diagnostics. The readings didn't make sense. The distortions weren't natural. Something was folding space. And then, the ship lost contact with the fleet. No explosion. No warning. Just silence. Verzek was informed. He shrugged it off. Sensor. Ghosts, he muttered. After all, no one was coming. Not the Council. Not the nearby systems. And Earth, please. He turned his eyes back to the burning horizon. Inside the bunkers, another day passed. The children had stopped asking when the ships would come. Even the most hopeful among the defenders had fallen quiet. But not Hale. He stood by the comm unit listening to static. Then, without warning, the speaker crackled. A voice. Sharp. Controlled. Calm. Varel Prime, this is the Sol Fleet Operations Division. Defensive action authorization confirmed. Arrival commencing. ETA 90 minutes. The room fell silent. A medic dropped the container she was carrying. A child looked up at her father and asked, "Did they say Earth?" Rendon Hale smiled. For the first time in weeks, they said Earth. On the cliffs above, Verzek's flagship pulsed with red alerts. Ships had been detected at extreme range. Not one, not two. Hundreds, dropping into real space from all angles. And they weren't broadcasting diplomatic credentials. They weren't asking for terms. They weren't hailing anyone. They were already in formation. That's when the Qatari finally understood. Something had changed. Something was coming. Something they weren't ready for. Because for the first time in a generation, Earth had answered. To understand why the Qatari had no fear of Earth, you had to look back. Not at what Earth was, but at what the galaxy thought it had become. After the War of the Rings, after the fall of Proxima, after the Council's fractured accords, Earth had gone silent. They pulled their fleets from allied territories. They closed their embassies. They shut down the relay gates connecting them to the central galactic network. The message had been subtle but clear. We are done. No explanation. No speeches. Just withdrawal. And for decades, that was that. The humans disappeared behind their border and watched. The Council tried to reach out, got no reply. Ambassadors were sent, none were received, and slowly the galaxy moved on. New powers rose. Old enemies made peace. Wars came and went. But the humans, they stayed quiet. Not out of weakness, out of something far more unsettling. Disinterest. For many, Earth became a legend, a cautionary tale, a once fierce species who burned too hot, too fast, and left behind only scorched pride. To the new generations, Earth was just a ghost with too much history and not enough relevance. And to the Qatari, it was a footnote, a has-been. They were wrong. Because back on Earth, in that long silence, something was happening. They weren't sulking. They were rebuilding. They weren't withdrawing. They were rearming. They weren't waiting for peace. They were preparing for the next time someone decided to test the line. Rendon Hale had known this. That's why he had never truly given up hope. He had been one of them once. A commander of the outer fleets, the first to see what humanity was becoming. He had watched Earth turn inward not out of fear but out of focus. To the rest of the galaxy, it looked like retreat. To those who served, it was more like the tightening of a fist. Deep within Earth's core worlds, beyond the orbital rings and below the ice-crusted stations, lay the hidden shipyards of Sol Command, places no alien eyes had ever seen. There, in dry docks, the size of small moons, the new fleets had been born, ships forged from adaptive alloys, engines capable of folding not just space, but time-space, weapons calibrated to frequencies no known shields could repel. These weren't warships, they were statements. They said, "We still can." They said, "We never forgot." They said, "If you call, we answer." The call had come from Varel Prime. A forgotten colony under siege. No strategic value, no resources to plunder, but they were human, and someone had dared to hurt them. That's all it took. Now, Earth's long silence was broken, not with noise, but with arrival. The Armada moved like a tide through the stars, not loud, not dramatic, just certain. Sol-class dreadnoughts, their hulls obsidian black, absorbed the light around them as they folded into orbit. Carrier platforms, each capable of housing thousands of fighters, drifted into position like chess pieces on a massive board. Support cruisers, stealth frigates, drone swarms, all in perfect formation. No scrambling. No confusion. Because they had rehearsed this. For decades. They knew what it meant when the signal came. They knew exactly what to do. Inside the command deck of the lead ship, ESS Vindicator, Admiral Reese Calder watched the tactical display come online. He wasn't angry. He wasn't proud. He was ready. This wasn't vengeance. This was response. Back on Varel Prime, the skies changed. Children pressed their faces to the bunker monitors, watching streaks of light pierce the clouds. Parents held their breath, and the defenders? They started to stand again, not because they could fight, but because now they remembered. They weren't alone. On the Qatari command ship, the mood had shifted. The confidence was gone. In its place, questions. How many ships had arrived? Why? Weren't they responding to hails? Why hadn't they made demands? They didn't realize. Earth didn't make demands, they made decisions. The humans sent no message to the Qatari. Not yet. They didn't need to. Their arrival said everything. Every ship in position, every weapon online, every fighter in the launch tubes. Waiting. Not for
orders, but for permission. And high above the world of Varel Prime, as alien warlords scrambled to make sense of the incoming doom, the humans gave no speeches, no ultimatums, just a quiet, system-wide broadcast. 4 words. Stand down, or don't.
The Qatari had fought many wars. They had invaded outer colonies, battled corporate fleets, and even held their own against council-sanctioned enforcement units. They believed in chaos, in striking fast, in fear as a weapon. But nothing in their long and brutal history had prepared them for what was now gathering above Varel Prime. The sky had turned dark, not from clouds, not from smoke, from ships, so many that they eclipsed the stars. Earth's armada had arrived, not in a wave, but in layers. Dreadnoughts gliding silently through orbit, cruisers sliding into flanking positions, carrier hulls opening like blooming flowers, releasing drone swarms that shimmered like metal fog. It wasn't just overwhelming, it was orchestration. This wasn't a fleet. This was a calculated machine. Every movement rehearsed, every action anticipated. The Qatari saw it, and for the first time they hesitated. From the surface, the colonists could see the glow through the atmosphere, a slow-moving wall of blue light, traced by engine flares and pulse trails, stretching across the horizon. One child whispered, "It looks like a shield." Another replied, "No, it looks like a trap." They weren't wrong. In the command deck of the ESS Vindicator, Admiral Reese Calder stood before a wall of displays. He didn't bark orders. He didn't raise his voice. He simply pointed. Ship by ship, formation by formation, the Armada moved into a tactical web. The Qatari fleet was now surrounded from 6 vectors, top, bottom, and all 4 cardinal planes. They didn't even realize it had happened. That's what decades of silence had bought Earth. Perfection. The Qatari commander, Verzek the Unbroken, was no fool. He had underestimated the humans. Yes. But now that they were here, he understood the danger. He immediately ordered a retreat vector plotted. But the nav team froze. The moment their drives powered up, human signal interference blanketed the system, not just jamming, total denial. Their ships weren't just blocked, they were commandeered. Earth had already hacked their movement protocols before they even finished calculating an exit path. Panic spread. Qatari gunships scrambled into defensive posture, forming a shaky perimeter. But the perimeter meant nothing, because Earth wasn't waiting for a fight. They were waiting for a reason. Inside the Vindicator, a second voice came online, one of the AI tactical overseers known only as Spire. Spire's voice was genderless, clear, and terrifying in its calm. Enemy formation locked, all weapons green. Awaiting engagement threshold. Admiral Calder didn't blink. Threshold condition? He asked. Spire replied, firing authorized if civilian structure is targeted again. Calder nodded once. And waited. Because that was the rule. Earth never fired first. But if you gave them a reason, they didn't fire second. They fired last. Down below, the people of Varel watched the siege break apart in real time. Qatari patrols fell back to their ships. No more attacks. No more bombardment. Just confusion. Just fear. Inside the bunkers, the militia captains asked Hale the same question over and over. What happens now? Rendon Hale's answer was always the same. Nothing. Unless they make the mistake of thinking they still have options. And in orbit, the Qatari still believed they did. Verzek opened a comm channel. For the first time, he tried to speak. Human commander. I am Verzek, warlord of the Qatari. We were unaware this colony fell under Earth's protection. Had we known? The response was immediate. You knew they were human. That's enough. Verzek hesitated. He tried again. We propose a ceasefire, a withdrawal, in exchange for another response. There is no negotiation. You've already made your decision. The line went dead, and at that exact moment, as if on cue, the Qatari made one final desperate error. One of their cruisers, misinterpreting fleet movements, fired a single plasma round at a surface target. It struck a hillside just beyond the main colony. No casualties, no damage, but the condition had been met. Threshold crossed. Spire confirmed. Civilian targeting confirmed. Engagement authorized. Admiral Calder turned to his ops officer. Begin. The Armada didn't roar. It didn't flash. It simply moved. And for the Qatari, that movement meant the end. There's a moment in every war when the tone shifts. Not because of a speech. Not because of a single event. But because something ancient and primal wakes up. And when it does, the only thing left to do is run. If you still can. The Qatari didn't. Run they couldn't. Not anymore. Their engines were locked. Their communication scrambled. Their escape routes sealed. The moment they targeted a civilian, they gave Earth exactly what it had been waiting for. Justification. The Armada responded. Without celebration, no music, no rallying cry, no flourish. Because this wasn't war. This was correction. A cold, methodical purge of a threat that had already made its decision. And now, Earth would finish it. The first volley was silent. Spire calculated the optimal strike, patterned to neutralize the Qatari's offensive fleet in under 8 seconds. Precision plasma lances carved through enemy shields before they could raise them. Ion disruptors shut down every active weapons system. Quantum torpedoes hit their targets before Qatari crews even knew they'd been launched. There was no firefight. There was only elimination. From the surface, Burrell's colonists saw only distant flashes in the sky, like stars winking out, one after another. Then came the shockwaves rumbling through the atmosphere like distant thunder. The militia dropped their weapons, not from fear, but from something else, awe. The Qatari formation disintegrated, one command ship vaporized, 2 support vessels disabled and left drifting, the remaining strike fleet gone in less than a minute. No stragglers, no survivors, no escape. Verzek, watching from his ship's bridge, barely had time to react. The holographic display of his fleet status flashed red across the board. He turned to his navigator. Gone. The console had exploded. He looked to his weapons officer, dead before she hit the floor. And then the lights flickered. One by one, every system on the Qatari flagship went dark. He tried to stand, but he never made it out of his chair. The Vindicator didn't fire again. It didn't need to. Earth's fleet didn't overkill. They didn't waste energy on the dramatic. They fired once, and the problem was gone. Back on Earth, no news channel reported the engagement. There was no public parade, no political broadcast. The operation didn't even have a name. It was just a response logged in the internal archives of Sol Command, marked, threat addressed, civilian lives preserved. That's what made it terrifying. The efficiency. Not vengeance, not rage, just a job. Done well. For the first time in recorded history, a known raiding fleet had been wiped out in a single coordinated strike without retaliation, and the galaxy noticed. Again. They had forgotten what it meant when Earth moved. Now, they were remembering. On Varel Prime, the bunkers opened. The people stepped into the sunlight, blinking, squinting, stunned. The sky was blue again. The horizon, once filled with fire and smoke, now shimmered with streaks of silver. Earth's ships, holding position like guardians. No one cheered. They didn't know how to. Not yet. Not after what they'd just seen. Randone Hale emerged last. He stood on the ridgeline, hands behind his back, watching the sky. A comm device pinged at his hip. A message from the Vindicator. Operation complete. Orbital presence will remain until full colony stabilization. Sol Command recognizes Varel Prime as an active human territory under protection. Hale nodded. No drama, no ceremony, just protection, like it had always been. And somewhere far above, inside the most powerful warship the galaxy had ever known, Admiral Calder turned off his display. Mission accomplished, he said quietly. Then, to no one in particular, next time maybe they'll remember who we are. The transmission hit the council chambers like a thunderclap. Varel Prime, thought to be a loss, had not only survived, it had been liberated, but not by the council, not by its allies, by Earth. The intercepted visuals were shaky, recorded from a damaged orbital buoy that somehow survived the engagement. At first, all it showed was darkness, then stars, then movement. And then, they appeared. Sleek, seamless ships moving in absolute formation. Hundreds of them. Thousands, perfectly synchronized. No lag, no hesitation. Some of the council delegates watching believed it was staged. No species moved like that. No species could be that unified. And yet, there they were. The might of a civilization that had once left the galactic stage returning in full force. And without a word, the footage didn't show a battle. There wasn't enough time. It showed the Qatari fleet blink into view, then vanish within moments. Their ships were dismantled, disabled, or reduced to light and ash, all within the time it took most navies to initiate a firing sequence. And then, silence. No declaration, no celebration. Just the quiet orbital shadow of Earth's judgment. The recording ended, and for a long time no one in the council chambers said a word, until one delegate leaned forward and whispered, "They didn't come to warn us. They came to remind us." Across the galaxy, panic didn't rise in a roar. It came in waves, soft, slow, deep. Governments began to audit their records. Who had insulted Earth publicly in the last century? Who had threatened their colonies? Who had once called them irrelevant? Old files were erased quietly. Diplomatic channels that had long gone unused were reopened overnight. Every government began sending the same message, disguised in different tones. We respect Earth's right to defend its own. Congratulations on the liberation effort. Let us know how we can assist. But Earth didn't respond. They didn't need to, because their silence had already done the talking. On neutral worlds, markets halted. Shipyards pivoted production to shielding and stealth, and dozens of border patrols rerouted around even the edges of known human space. They weren't commanded to. They just did because something unspoken had passed through the galaxy, a message with no words, and it said, "If Earth rises, stay out of the way." Aboard the ESS Vindicator, Admiral Calder stood by the main viewport as the human fleet lingered over Varel. Prime below, the planet began to return to life. Power grids reactivated. Emergency shelters opened. Food drops were scheduled from auxiliary supply ships. None of it was for show. There were no media broadcasts, no political speeches, no flag raising, because this wasn't a conquest. This was a promise kept. One made, generations ago, and Earth had not forgotten. Across the Armada, crews returned to readiness status. They didn't relax. They didn't unwind, because the mission wasn't done. Earth had defended Varel Prime, but they didn't know how many were watching, and now that the galaxy had seen what humanity could still do, the test would come again. The Council wasn't the only group watching. In the darker parts of the galaxy, uncharted systems and outlaw sectors, Dozens of factions saw the Varel footage and began to panic. The Kravari Syndicate delayed its planned incursion into Sector Luma, the Jiran Compact. Once allies of the Qatari burned their communications logs and issued an immediate neutrality declaration. Even pirate warlords began repainting their ships, removing any insignia that could trace them back to anti-human operations. But one reaction stood apart. From the edge of the galaxy, the Zelquari observers, who had always known, always warned, always waited, sat in their silent temples, watching the arrival footage again and again, not with fear, not with surprise, but with understanding. The eldest among them turned to his disciples and said, "The storm has not returned. It never left." Back on Varel, a single beacon was planted, on the outskirts of the colony, simple, unmarked, just a polished black pillar with a glowing line of text that shifted between languages. This world is protected. No formal treaty, no diplomatic reshuffling, no official Earth presence. Just the Armada, still hovering quietly, still holding position like it had nowhere else to be. Because maybe it didn't. Maybe Earth hadn't just returned to protect Varel, Prime. Maybe they were making a point. To everyone. Everywhere. Don't mistake silence for absence. Don't mistake distance for indifference. And never ever mistake memory for weakness. Because Earth never forgets. And when they come with everything. The Qatari had always believed fear was enough. Fear was a tool, a weapon, a language. They spoke it fluently, used it to dominate, intimidate, expand. For cycles, it worked. No need for diplomacy, no need for alliances, just fire and pain and the echo of names whispered in terror. But for the first time, no one was afraid of them. Not anymore. The few Qatari survivors, scattered in crippled escape pods and shielded life vessels drifting near Varel's orbit, were silent. They didn't try to flee. They didn't signal for help. They didn't speak. Because what was there to say? They had just come face to face with a force that didn't posture, didn't boast, didn't need to explain itself. And that's what terrified them most. Earth didn't act out of hatred. Earth didn't seem angry. Earth just acted. Cold, controlled, final. The Qatari were not used to being hunted. They were not used to being outgunned. And they had never, ever faced an enemy who treated them like a problem, to be solved, not a rival to be fought. That distinction mattered, because it meant they were not seen as equals. They were seen as unacceptable. And Earth had removed them the way one might erase a corrupted file, deliberate, efficient, without ceremony. The surviving Qatari war captains, deep in the asteroid systems beyond the frontier, watched the Varel footage on repeat. Some refused to believe it, others accepted it in silence. But all of them knew one thing: they would never recover from this. Their name was now stained, not because of a defeat, but because they had proven beyond doubt that they had misjudged everything. Qatari. Culture had always thrived on strength. They told stories of domination, of bloody victories, of unchallenged reigns. But now a new story would spread, one they could not stop, a story of how they targeted a small human colony, expecting surrender, only for Earth to return from the shadows, wielding the full weight of its silence. Story of how the Qatari didn't just lose, they were erased. Among the Qatari elders there was debate. Should they issue an apology? Should they send tribute? Should they disappear entirely? The younger warbloods raged, claiming they could rebuild, retaliate, restore the name of the Qatari with new alliances. But no one listened to them, because everyone now understood. This wasn't a war they could win. Not by strength, not by strategy, not even by surrender. One Qatari elder, aged and scarred, finally spoke in the war chamber. His words were recorded, broadcast in secret among surviving Qatari strongholds. "We thought they were sleeping," he said. "But Earth does not sleep. It waits." He paused. We used to believe the humans were weak. We were wrong. They are simply measured. And then, pray they never run out of patience again. Outside Qatari space, the rest of the galaxy listened. The transmission was leaked. No one denied its authenticity, and from that moment forward, Qatari ships began changing their emblems, their flags, their names, anything to distance themselves from what had happened at Varel Prime, because the galaxy's memory was long, and the Qatari had become the example, not of defiance, but of regret. Even rogue factions that had long idolized Qatari methods, brutality, speed, intimidation, began to rethink everything. They saw Earth's response not as a military act, but as a philosophical one. You chose to harm us. We chose to end you. Not a punishment. Not a vendetta, just a conclusion. Back on Varel Prime, the colonists were rebuilding. The orbital fleet remained in place, keeping silent watch. And one morning, a small Qatari escape pod crash-landed near the eastern ridge. Inside, a single, surviving officer, wounded, unarmed. He expected torture, imprisonment, maybe death. Instead, he was met by medical staff, fed and given water, then placed in isolation, alive, untouched. The humans didn't need revenge. They had already won, and the survivor? He would carry the story back if they ever let him go. He would become the final thread in a tale the galaxy would never forget. Earth does not chase power. Earth does not broadcast threat. But if you force them to rise, you won't survive their answer. Varel Prime had been a forgotten colony, a blip on old star charts, a place where pioneers went to escape politics, borders, and the noise of the inner systems. They had never asked for much, just the chance to live, build, grow, and for a long time they believed they were on their own. When the council dismissed their distress call, when neighboring sectors ignored their cries, when the sky filled with fire, they had made peace with the idea that they would be left behind. But they weren't. And now, the colony was changing. Not because the Qatari were gone, but because the people had seen something they never thought they would. Humanity had not abandoned them, not in spirit, not in strength, not in silence. The day after the battle, Admiral Calder authorized full deployment of aid assets. Orbital haulers began lowering prefabricated supply domes to the surface. Medical stations were constructed in hours. Hydroponic tanks were seeded with fast-growth food strains. Defense platforms were quietly installed on Varel's moons. And through it all, Earth soldiers and crew members worked without fanfare. No flags. No medals. Just purpose. The people of Varel didn't know what to say. What do you say to ghosts from the past? To the legends your grandparents whispered about? The humans who had once shattered empires and then vanished into their own borders? And now, they were here. Real. Present. Relentless. But kind. Children approached the massive Earth mechs standing guard at the colony perimeter. The machines didn't speak, but their human operators handed out water and ration packs. Engineers helped repair the shield grid, upgrading it without being asked. One colonist, an old hydro technician named Laro, stared up at a hovering Sol-class ship and muttered, "They came back." A medic beside him nodded. "They never left. We just didn't hear them breathing." The council tried to contact Varel Prime 3 days after the incident. A diplomatic envoy, safe phrasing, expressions of regret. But no one on Varel answered. They didn't need the council anymore. They never had. A monument was built on the colony's northern ridge, not by order, but by the people. Just a carved stone, pulled from the crater, where the Qatari had fired their last shot. The inscription said only, "We stood." They came. No signature. But everyone knew who they were. Even as the humans rebuilt, they didn't stay long. Sol Command had no interest in occupation. Their purpose was protection, not presence. Within 2 weeks, the first waves of Earth's fleet began withdrawing. Silently, orderly, but not without leaving something behind. A single orbital sentry station, autonomous and shielded, placed in high geosynchronous orbit. No guns, no crew, just a beacon that pulsed once every 20 seconds. A heartbeat. The last Earthship to leave Varel was the ESS Vindicator. Before departure, Admiral Calder opened a direct channel to the colony leadership. His message was brief. You are under our watch, always. You were never forgotten. Then the ship vanished into the stars. The people of Varel didn't cheer. There were no celebrations, only a quiet, steady return to life. But something fundamental had shifted. They were not just a colony anymore. They were part of something again, not a government, not an empire, a family, bound by blood, by history, by the kind of memory that never forgets its own. Old stories were retold differently now. The tales of Earth weren't myths anymore. They were warnings and promises that if the galaxy ever tried to hurt the forgotten again, if it ever turned its back on the weak again, there was one force that would not wait for permission, one voice that would not ask for debate. Earth would come, and it would bring everything. It wasn't just a colony that was watching. The whole galaxy had seen what happened at Varel Prime. And now they were listening, because Earth didn't hold press conferences. They didn't demand apologies. They didn't send ambassadors to scold or posture. They just sent one thing, a message. It came as a secure transmission, encrypted to Council standards, yet somehow already compatible with every major communication system across thousands of species. It contained no threats, no accusations, no conditions, just a short video. The first half showed the Qatari fleet entering orbit over Varel Prime. Then, the single plasma strike that hit civilian ground. Then, the silence, followed by the arrival of Earth's Armada, the fleet formations, the coordinated strikes, the end, and at the end of the video, black screen, white text. They called for help, so we came. A pause. Then, the second line, if they call again, we will come again. And that was it. No signature, no flag, no symbol, just truth. The message spread faster than any fleet ever could. By the end of the first day, it had reached every government, every outpost, every pirate haven, and every corporate network, and in every corner of the stars, plans changed. The Council convened an emergency session, not because of the Qatari loss, no one mourned them, but because Earth had returned without warning, without clearance, and without asking anyone's permission. And no one had the courage to call it a violation, because if Earth was watching, what would a second message say? A few bold delegates suggested a formal response, open communication, diplomatic outreach, reintegration into Council affairs, but no one followed through, because deep down, they understood Earth didn't leave the Council. They outgrew it, and now they didn't need a seat at the table, they were the table. Across trade guilds and defense alliances, new protocols were implemented almost overnight. No ships enter human-claimed space, no scanning of Earth-controlled relays, no political statements involving humanity without review. Even sectors untouched by the Varel event began sending tributes, not as bribes, but as gestures of peace. Gifts, resources, offers of alliance, all quietly ignored. Earth answered only one kind of call, and it wasn't flattery. In the outer sectors, pirate factions and fringe warlords began pulling their fleets inward, not because they were targeted, but because they knew it was only a matter of time before someone else made the same mistake the Qatari had. And when that happened, the next distress signal echoed through the stars. They didn't want to be anywhere nearby. In schools across the galaxy, history books were rewritten. The Earth Wars were no longer footnotes. The Sol reclamation campaigns were now required study. Children were taught not only what humanity did, but why they stopped, and more importantly, why they might start again. On some worlds, statues were erected, not of human leaders, not of Earth's warships, but of beacons, simple towers of stone and metal, with a single inscription beneath. When no one else came, they did. The most powerful. Ripple, though, wasn't in the halls of politics or trade. It was in the hearts of people. Those who had lived under the shadow of warlords. Those who had watched council bureaucracy fail time and again. Those who had been told to stay quiet, stay small, stay compliant. Now, they knew something else. There was a force in the galaxy that didn't care about politics. A force that didn't ask who you were aligned with, what your trade agreement said, or how far you were from the center. They only cared about one thing. Were you in danger? And if the answer was yes, they came. That was Earth's message, and they only had to say it. Once. Time passed. Varel Prime rebuilt. The Qatari vanished into the shadows of history, and Earth's fleets returned to the deep. But things were not the same, because now the galaxy knew. The sky was not empty. The void was not quiet, and Earth was no longer a myth. There were no more raids on human colonies, no more testing of Earth's silence. Even the most arrogant of empires began to tread carefully near the edge of Sol-designated space, because they understood something now. Earth does not bark. Earth does not growl. Earth waits. And when it moves with the certainty of extinction. In a quiet corner of the galaxy, a child once asked their teacher, "Why do we study Earth so much? They don't even speak to us." The teacher paused, then answered, "Because we only have to understand them once. That's all the time they'll give us." Earth never claimed to rule. They never called themselves a galactic power. They never asked to sit on any throne. But everyone knew where the true center was now. Not the council, not the trade networks, not the ancient empires, but that pale blue dot that once looked to the stars and dreamed of flying. And now they fly in silence, they fly in force, they fly only when it matters. Aboard a hidden station orbiting an uninhabited world, a memorial was built. No flag, no anthem, just a single corridor filled with names, names of colonies once thought lost but saved. The last name on the wall, Varel Prime. Next to it, a quote, simple, eternal. When we were forgotten, they remembered. Rendon Hale, now and T. Old man once more remained on Varel. He didn't return to Earth, he didn't accept medals, he didn't speak at conferences. He stayed. He taught the next generation how to build shields better, how to send signals the right way, how to survive the silence. And every night he walked to the ridge overlooking the valley. The sky was clear, but he knew better. He knew what was out there, watching, listening, waiting, because Earth doesn't sleep. Earth doesn't forget. Earth doesn't abandon its own. And somewhere in the infinite dark, someone would cry for help again. Another world, another voice, another call. And when that moment comes, the stars will flicker, the sky will split, and the void will fill with shadow and light. Not for war, not for conquest, not for revenge, but for protection. Because Earth does not rule the galaxy, it guards it in silence and memory and force. The sky is not empty, it never was.